the emphasis is on the unelected part, and I'm certainly not self-appointed either. What happened was Dirty Jobs went on the air in 2003 and never went away. It's aired 12 times every week for the last, almost 20 years. And so people optically see me doing things that look a lot like work and therefore assume that I am some sort of expert. Dare I say a family handyman. I'm really not. I'm really like a perpetual apprentice, and I try anything I can, and I'm usually working alongside of an expert. So over time, people see that dynamic and they just assume I'm much smarter and way more talented than in fact I am, which is great. The lost art of DIY is a tricky business because on the one hand, obviously, that's the fat part of your bat. That's what you're focused on. You want people out there, rolling up their sleeves and doing it themselves. The other side of the coin is there's a giant industry of trained experts out there who actually know what they're doing, right? And so I'm always interested in that space between the aspiring expert and the actual expert. Like, when do you actually run the electric wire in your own house? How up to speed do you need to be before you start handling electricity? In my view, pretty up to speed. So on the one hand, there's a great empowering message that says, hey, do it yourself, learn, figure it out. It's gratifying. On the other hand, there's a compelling message that says, don't do that. Don't do that. Call an expert. They're out there, right? So most people, to some degree or another, fall somewhere in between. Figuring out who you are with regard to your own expertise is, it's an important life lesson, and I think an important lesson in your industry. Don't get ahead of your skis, but don't be afraid to try a thing. Just, don't screw it up. The state of skilled trades in the U.S. is concerning. We have 7.3 million open jobs right now, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Many of those jobs don't require a 4-year degree. Most don't. They require training. They require skill. They require a willingness to master a trade that's in demand, right? So that's the skills gap, and it's real. And as the skills gap continues to widen, college debt continues to grow for some reason. So we're at $1.6 trillion now in student loans. We've got more open positions than we've ever had. We have near full employment. And so it's a tricky business for the employers in the skilled trades world because the labor pool is very, very shallow. The good news in that is that for individuals who are actually willing to learn a skill and put it to work, there's never been a better time to prosper and get on that path. So my foundation sees that every day. We find people who put those skills to work, and then over time we can keep up with them and talk to them and see how it's going. And the success stories that come out now are great, and part of what I do today is try and make sure those stories get in front of as many people as possible. Because if parents and guidance counselors don't see a persuasive case, then I don't know how we get out of it. So anyway, long answer, but the state of skilled trades is vexing because on the one hand, it's a representation of limitless opportunity. On the other hand, it's a reflection of what we value. And at the moment, we don't seem to be valuing the pursuit of a useful skill. For whatever reason, we've supplanted it with some other version of success. And it's making problems for a lot of people. The only thing I've ever seen to improve perceptions and realities around things like work ethic or delayed gratification or attitude, all that Horatio Alger stuff, you have to be very careful because, hey, boomer, right? Right? Oh, look, here's a guy in his 50s shaking his fingers saying, you just got to get out there and work a little harder. People hate that, and I know that. So the country doesn't need a lecture. The country doesn't need a sermon. What we need are real, no bullcrap examples of men and women who have prospered as a result of mastering a skill. And part of that success is work ethic. Part of it is saying, yes, I'm not looking for the easy thing. In fact, I'm suspicious of the easy thing. I embrace a little bit of discomfort because if it's uncomfortable, a little, then it's probably taking me someplace worth going. That was one of the big lessons of Dirty Jobs. You watch that show and you see a lot of people who look really uncomfortable, many of whom are covered with other people's crap, right? Well, guess what? 40, 50 people on that show were multimillionaires. And we never made a big point of that because that's not what the show was about. But success doesn't look, like success all of the time. And so with regard to work ethic, skilled labor, and a willingness to master a skill that's in demand, all that added up is an answer to your question, I think. I mean, that's a little too close to advice, and I don't like to give advice, not because I don't think I'm very wise and full of wonderful information, but because I don't think cookie cutter advice, I think that's very dangerous, and I think there's a temptation today, especially because everything's politicized, to try and say the thing that makes the most sense for the most people, right? And that's what causes the problems. So I wouldn't presume to tell somebody where to start in the skilled trades until I'd sat down with them and had a cup of coffee and had a sense of where their particular talents lie and, to what degree their head's screwed on properly. You don't know. But in a general way, I've seen more success come out of a welding certificate than almost any other pursuit. Not because the people who get it spend their whole career welding, but because way leads on to way. And once you know how to weld, you really do have a skill that's in demand. You can go anywhere in the country and you can work. And you can make six figures. I know plenty of people who have done it. But you can also find your way pretty quickly into the plumbing world, steam fitting, pipe fitting, mechanical, heating, air conditioning, electric. Next thing you know, you're a mechanical contractor and you got 3 vans and a dozen people are working for you. And so nobody ever tells that story, but the path into small business success often starts with a welding certificate, right, or a plumbing license. So I try and talk about entrepreneurship. At the same time, I talk about the need to learn a skill, because it's a mistake, I think, to separate the two. It's not just labor and management. It's not just capital and work. It's, all these binary choices are, I think, making things complicated for a lot of people. And all the pat advice that's out there is also dangerous. Look, we just spent 50 years telling everybody, basically, that the best path for the most people was a 4-year degree. Now, the best path for a lot of people might be a 4-year degree, and the best path for a lot of people who can afford it might be a 4-year degree. But the best path for a kid who can't afford it, whose brain isn't hardwired to Mideastern studies, right, or business development or whatever it is, it might not be well served borrowing 80 grand, going in a hawk, to learn a skill that's no longer in demand. Long way of saying I'm stingy with advice. But if it feels really good and really comfortable, it's probably a bad idea. I'm not completely incompetent, but it just doesn't. I think personally, one of God's great cruel jokes on the species was to make the handy gene recessive, which he did. My grandfather, he could build a house without a blueprint. He could take a watch apart and put it together blind. He had the chip, and he knew these things intuitively. He only went to the 7th grade, and by the time he was 30, he was a master electrician, steam fitter, pipe fitter, architect, all these things. And I was sure that I would follow in his footsteps. I just didn't get the same cards. I just didn't, it didn't come easily. It was very frustrating. And it was my pop who ultimately said, look, you can be a tradesman, just get a different toolbox. So I got in the entertainment business, but I tried to approach my vocation like he approached his, as a jobber, project-based and skill-based. So my toolbox had different stuff in it than his, and so in the classic handy definition, no, that's not me. But if you looked at my misspent career in entertainment and went through the resume, you would see the same kind of disparity that I think a pretty well-balanced tradesman would have in his or her life. A lot of different projects, some directing, some writing, some producing, some singing, some acting, some hosting, a lot of narrating. That was my toolbox. So it's not like I chose not to be handy, but once I learned enough to understand my limitations, I didn't pretend to be something I wasn't. I didn't beat my head against the wall. See, that's another problem with advice. People love to say, stay the course. Stay the course, just be persistent. Well, staying the course only makes sense if you're going in the right direction. And if you've seen American Idol, you've seen a lot of people who have no business opening their mouths and pretending that they know how to sing. Those people don't need to be encouraged to follow their dreams in entertainment. They need to be handed a welding torch. Said, maybe try this. A little less singing, a little more working. Vecchiasimara senti il resto al pianto scendere sacri monti o devi le me grazia ricevi.